Hello and welcome to today's Environment and Energy Leader webinar titled 3 Steps to a Compliant Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, sponsored by J.J. Keller. My name is Jessica Hunt and I'm the Director of Events for E&E Leader. Before we go through some troubleshooting and some other items, please take a minute or so to read the content disclaimer that J.J. Keller provided. First and foremost, I do want to thank you for being with us wherever you are in the world today. In case you are unable to join us live, this event will be available on demand within about 3 to 4 hours after we conclude the live event. I am going to apologize to anyone on in advance if you hear my dogs and or kids in the background. It is a day off from school and they are home today, but hopefully that will not be the case. If you are having any technical issues, please troubleshoot first using the help widget at the bottom of your console. If you are still having any issues after performing those steps, please feel free to give me a message, just send me a message using the Q&A widget or using the attendee chat feature. And speaking of the attendee chat feature, I can see that we have people joining us from Mexico, from Tennessee, Ohio, Texas, all over the place today. So we do appreciate you taking the time to send us a message, tell us where you are watching from, and we look forward to talking throughout the event. If you have questions for today's speakers, please submit over the next 50 to 55 minutes. We will do our best to get to one, if not more than one question before the end of today's presentation. But if we do not get a chance to answer your specific question, a member of the team will follow up with you as soon as possible. We always love working with the team from J.J. Keller, and at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Mishka and Robin, because I know you are here to listen to their expertise and not to listen to mine. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to them.
All right. Thank you so much, Jess. So today's webcast is presented by the J.J. Keller Safety Management Suite. The Safety Management Suite streamlines compliance at every level of your business, making it easy to develop, implement, and maintain an industry-specific safety program. And because it's your success that's our priority, today's attendees will be offered complimentary access to our compliance tools and resources in the Safety Management Suite. So on behalf of J.J. Keller Safety Management Suite, thank you for joining us. All right, so stormwater is something that many businesses have to deal with, whether they are big or small, and it's a factor across many industries. If your activities can contaminate stormwater runoff, you have to take action. Because stormwater programs are so common, we're often asked to help customers understand what they must do for compliance. Especially important is the development of an effective written stormwater pollution prevention plan. So after an introduction to some basic program structure, we'll spend most of our time focusing on these plans. So our goal today will be to review the basic requirements of stormwater regulation, introduce the elements of stormwater pollution prevention plans, draw on our experience to provide 3 steps that you can use to develop and update a compliant stormwater pollution prevention plan, and then we'll use some common compliance errors as a learning tool. And at the end, we'll save some time at the end of the hour, hopefully, to answer some of your questions. All right, so we'd like to begin an interactive poll question to give us a better idea about who's attending today, and we'll share the poll results in just a moment. So looking at the poll, How is stormwater permitted for your operation? We have several options. Do you fall under an industrial general permit or a construction general permit? Perhaps you have an individual permit that specifically covers your stormwater discharges, or maybe you have another type of permit, and maybe you're just unsure, or if stormwater permits apply to your facility or not. While we give you time to make your selection, we thought we'd define stormwater a bit because we know that some of you may be new to this. So, Robin, could you help us with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mishka. And hello, everybody. I like to think of stormwater discharge as water from rain or snowmelt that does not immediately seep into the ground. So instead, it flows over or through natural or man-made storage or conveyance systems. That means it can pick up industrial pollutants and discharge them directly into nearby water bodies or indirectly via storm sewer systems. Now, these pollutants might be your heavy metals, organic chemicals, oil and grease, or debris. The thing is, because stormwater can impair water bodies and pollute drinking water, federal EPA and many states regulate stormwater and require permitting. And those permits require a Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan to prevent those toxic stormwater discharges. Mishka, okay, so it looks like we may have some of those poll results.
All right. All right, perfect. So we have here approximately 54.5% actually with industrial general stormwater permits, 9.1% with construction general stormwater permits, 18.2% under individual permits, no other type of stormwater permit, kind of as expected, and then 9.1% that are not sure, and another 9.1% not required. So thank you guys for participating. That will definitely help us, kind of guide our focus as we move through the rest of our material here. All right, so let's jump into the very foundation of stormwater protection in the U.S. Authorized by Section 402 of the Federal Clean Water Act, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES program, establishes requirements for all point sources that discharge or have the potential to discharge pollutants into the waters of the U.S. Point source is defined in the Clean Water Act, and it means a discernible, confined, and discrete conveyance from which pollutants are or may be discharged. So think of things like pipes, ditches, conduits, containers, and tunnels. Those are all considered point sources. Regulations that govern stormwater discharges are found in one section of the larger NPDES program, and that's specifically Section 122.26. So 40 CFR 122.26 establishes permit requirements for 3 types of regulated stormwater discharges. Those from industrial operations, discharges from construction sites, and activities and discharges from municipal separate stormwater systems. So that last type, a municipal separate stormwater system, commonly called an MS4 for short, this refers to systems owned by a state, city, town, village, or other public entity that discharges into waters of the U.S. These systems are designed to collect and move only stormwater, so not combined with other types of wastewater, and it can't be a part of a sewage treatment or publicly owned treatment works facility. So MS4 systems include storm drains, pipes, ditches, etc. But having said all of that, MS4 permits are the only type of stormwater permit that we will not be covering in detail in this particular presentation. For the remainder of today's conversation, we will focus on industrial and construction permits. All right, Robin, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Mishka. Okay, so in our experience, stormwater permitting is different than almost every other environmental permitting program. So for stormwater permits, there are general permits that apply broadly to applicable sources. Now, general permits set the same effluent limitations and requirements for every entity who is eligible to apply for general permit. And this is clearly a different approach than individual permits of other programs and those issued for stormwater dischargers that don't meet the general permit applicability. Issuing general permits simplifies and speeds up the permitting process. The permit issuing agency spends far less time reviewing the details of each application and isn't tasked with establishing specific effluent limitations or conditions for each individual source. Now, federal EPA has two general permits they maintain. First, the multi-sector general permit that was last updated in 2021. Now, early in 2021, there was a comprehensive update that took effect on March 1st of last year. Then, as you can see on the slide, the multi-sector permit had a minor modification that took effect in September of 2021. Now, the second general permit is the construction general permit that was updated earlier this year and took effect back in February. All right, it's worth noting that the stormwater section, Part 122.26, can be, and in most cases, is delegated to states, tribes, and local agencies. Now, this means the federal general permits that we are primarily discussing today technically apply in a limited number of geographic regions. Now, this may make you wonder why we are focusing on permits that have such a limited applicability, and the reason is twofold. First, although many states have their own programs and general permits, many of them look similar to the federal permits, and therefore being familiar with the federal EPA permits can give you a strong starting place to understand your local specifics. And second, the state, tribal, and local programs can be more stringent, but not less. So while you may have additional requirements based on where you're located, the pieces of the federal program have to be addressed as well. So being familiar with EPA's general permit is a very helpful first step. Now, let's look at what is found in each of the two federal general permits and who they each apply to. On this slide, as you can see in the second column, the multi-sector general permit applies to 11 listed activities, and we'll list all those 11 on the next slide. The third column here says the construction general permit applies construction actions that result in a disturbance of the land, including clearing, grading, excavating, and other similar activities. Now, these permits also include construction-related activities that support your construction project. So things such as stockpiles, concrete truck washouts, fueling areas, material storage areas, and equipment storage areas. It's worth noting that there are situations for each permit that are exempt from coverage. So for the multi-sector permit, that is true when a no exposure certification is issued for an industrial site. Now, this is EPA's mechanism to reduce compliance burden for sites where all industrial activities are protected from contact with stormwater. The construction general permit, on the other hand, does not apply to routine maintenance activities, so such as landscaping, road maintenance, and other activities similar to these. It also does not cover construction activities that do not disturb land, such as interior remodeling. And last, you can see that no matter which permit or which general permit applies to a site and its operations, if one applies, then a stormwater pollution prevention plan is required. So as promised, it's important to show you the 11 activities covered by the multi-sector general permit, as you can see on this screen. Those subject to effluent limitation guidelines, heavy manufacturing, coal mining and oil and gas, hazardous waste TSC facilities, landfills, scrapyards and battery reclaimers, steam electric power generating plants, transportation facilities with certain operations, sewage treatment works, construction sites that disturb 5 acres or more but these are mostly permitted separately under a construction stormwater permit and light manufacturing. Now you can imagine that rainwater and snowmelt could potentially pick up pollutants at these locations, so these are specifically regulated by the multi-sector general permit. Now I should also mention that you will want to check Appendix B, as in David, of the permit to verify that your industry is covered. The permit is limited to discharges from standard industrial codes or SIC codes listed in Appendix B. Now I'll turn things back over to Mishka.
All right, thank you so much, Robin. And so as Robin mentioned, one common item needed by both the construction and multi-sector general permits is a stormwater pollution prevention plan. So let's take a closer look at these plans. A stormwater pollution prevention plan is commonly referred to by the acronym SWPPP, and it's, in the industry we often just say SWIP. So in addition to this shorthand term, a SWIP may also be referred to by a number of different names. Your company or state may use terms like a construction best practices plan, a sediment and stormwater plan, or an erosion, sediment, and pollution prevention plan. But, no matter what term is used, as long as the plan meets certain criteria, it's a SWIP. So every SWIP must include 3 parts. First, a SWIP identifies potential pollution sources. Second, it outlines control measures that reduce or eliminate the risk of pollutants being discharged into stormwater runoff. And last, every SWIP describes the procedures that a source will use to comply with the applicable stormwater permit. So each SWIP is specific to the conditions of each work site. So for example, a large construction company, they can't have one SWIP that covers all of their work sites. Each site would need a specific SWIP for their situation. SWIPs also have to be kept up to date, and they really should be considered like a living document. So they aren't just written once and done, but rather they're intended to be updated whenever there is, say, like a relevant a change. We need to keep them relevant and keep them accurate. All right, so looking closer at the elements required in each multi-sector SWIP, you'll find 6 parts. Every SWIP that addresses industrial operations must include a description of the activities at the site, as well as a description of physical features of the site. The plan must identify structural stormwater pollution controls and procedures for preventing spills and unintentional releases that could impact stormwater. The multi-sector permit requires certain inspections and monitoring. The plan has to describe how these will be met, including by whom, the frequency, how and where records will be kept. And last, each multi-sector SWIP must explain how an industrial source will meet stormwater employee training requirements. All right, so the elements required by a construction SWIP are similar but slightly different. So let's take a look at those. A construction SWIP must name the construction project and SWIP contact information. Again, this is because it must be specific to the single job site. In the same vein, the SWIP has to include a description of activities and physical properties of the site and must include a site map. Specifically relating to stormwater, the SWIP must identify potential sources of runoff pollutants and controls that will be used to reduce those pollutants. Unique to the construction SWIP is the need to include procedures for site maintenance and inspections. Lastly, records of action taken as a result of the inspections must also be incorporated into the SWIP. All right, so if you want assistance with your stormwater pollution prevention plan, the J.J. Keller Safety Management Suite offers a template for that. In fact, we have over 125 pre-written safety plan templates for OSHA, EPA, and DOT. just choose your topic, fill out the form, and in minutes you'll have a comprehensive written plan that's built for your business. If you'd like complimentary access to the compliance tool and resources and safety management suite, we'll use the poll on the screen to select your interest. Oh, yep. All right, and along with your access to the service, we'll also email a PDF for spill control sequence white paper. So while you make your selection, let's take a couple of questions. I know a couple of them have come in already. Robin, maybe you could start us out?
Yeah, I can absolutely do that. So we have an attendee that says, are names required in our SWP, or can we use just job titles? Okay, so this attendee brings up a great point. Employee turnover, something that is very prevalent, it seems, recently. It can be a big issue, and sometimes it takes a lot of effort just to keep updating the names in a plan. And like this attendee suggests, if you just have job titles in your plan, that can help because it means you won't have to fix your plan when someone leaves or moves around the company. I should say it's important, well, it's actually required to have an up-to-date list of stormwater pollution prevention team members in your SWP, but it's not required for you to use names. So you can identify them by the title. However, you can use both names and job titles if you want. I hope that answers your question. Mishka, how about you?
Oh, perfect, Robin. Thank you. That was a really great explanation. Let's see here. So we have an attendee that wants us to talk a little bit more about what a point source is. And I think this is a great question. The EPA defines a point source as, and I'm going to quote this, a discernible, confined, and discrete conveyance, including but not limited to any pipe, ditch, channel, tunnel, conduit, well, discrete fissure, container, rolling stock, concentrated animal feeding operation, landfill leachate collection system, vessel or other floating craft from which pollutants are or may be discharged. And that's the end of the quote, and that's from 40 CFR 122.2. So think of a point source as a pollution discharging from one place or one identifiable point. Much of EPA's progress in improving water quality has not been by accident. It's a result of controlling point sources of pollution. Now, a non-point source is anything that is not a point source, and pollutant loads from non-point sources they're harder to define. Those continue to present problems in many parts of the U.S. because you just can't really trace that pollution back to one source. And I hope that helps to clarify, the differences between, what a point source is and in the same vein, what is a non-point source. All right, well, let's get back to the presentation material. But of course, please keep those questions coming in. Again, hopefully we'll have some time at the end of our session to take some more of those. So at this point, we've covered the basic stormwater program requirements, and here we'll change gears a bit as we move into 3 steps to developing and updating a SWP. As we mentioned a few slides ago, a stormwater pollution prevention plan is an important component in compliance for both construction and industrial sources. Because of this, we'll spend some time covering the 3 steps that can help you develop and update your SWP. So the first step is to assess sources of pollution, making sure to identify all the potential types of contaminants and parts of the operation they could come from. The next step is to select appropriate stormwater control measures that minimize the discharge of pollutants during storm events for each of these sources that were identified in step 1. And the third step is to develop procedures for conducting tasks required for compliance. So these include inspection and monitoring activities at the site, as well as scheduling regular maintenance of control measures. Robin, will you take us into step 1?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mishka. So as a first step, let's here be helpful if you could see my slides. Here we go. Okay, so as a first step in updating or preparing a stormwater pollution prevention plan, you'll need to identify all the potential sources of stormwater pollution from your site or facility. So to do this, you'll start with a very straightforward look at activities and the layout of the facility. We suggest using existing data from sampling and reports if they exist as a reference. This can point you in directions that may need more attention or point you to a contaminant source that hasn't been identified before. Once you've done the assessments, you'll use the information you gather to update your site maps and best management practices throughout your SWPP. No matter if you're complying with the construction or the multi-sector general permit, part of your first step in developing a SWPP is to gain a thorough understanding of the activities conducted and the equipment at your location. Now, this will allow you to identify potential pollutant discharge concerns. So to complete this step, start with a detailed walkthrough of your facility to identify materials or material handling activities that are exposed to stormwater. For an industrial site, EPA defines the industrial materials and material handling activities you should be looking for. Now, the agency says, and I quote, "Industrial materials or activities include, but are not limited to, material handling equipment or activities, industrial machinery, raw materials, intermediate products, byproducts, final products, or waste products. Material handling activities include storage, loading and unloading, transportation, or conveyance of any raw materials, intermediate product, final product, or waste product," end quote. If you can't remember all of that, this definition can be found in 40 CFR 122.26, paragraph G. Lastly, while at the site, you'll want to interview your employees who may be more familiar with daily operations than you might be. This will help you thoroughly identify any activities that may contribute stormwater pollutants, but that may not be readily visible during your walkthrough. Your assessment should also include source-specific conditions such as soil types, drainage patterns, existing vegetation, and topography. Especially important in construction SWPPs, this assessment is your foundation for building your SWPP and developing your final site plan. Now, you should document how stormwater currently drains from the site, the location of discharge points, the topographic features, and the slope throughout the site. Identify soil types, specifically noting any highly erodible soils. Indicate in your notes any areas with past soil contamination. And finally, identify vegetation and other natural features that are at the site. So this can be things including trees, streams, wetlands, slopes, and other natural features that will need to be protected. The last step in your assessment of potential pollutant sources is to document what you find. If you're updating an existing SWPP, incorporate any changes that you found. If you're creating a new SWPP, use the information to develop your site maps, the list of potential contaminants, as well as any best management practices and your control measures. Mishka?
All right, thank you so much, Robin. All right, so step 2 is identifying and selecting control measures appropriate and adequate for your source. Stormwater control measures are practices and equipment that reduce the discharge or potential for discharge of pollutants into stormwater. Stormwater control measures can be divided into 2 classes of control, structural and non-structural practices. So Structural control measures may include things like the installation of hard structures to control. This includes practices such as vegetative swales, collection and reuse of stormwater, inlet controls, snow management, and infiltration devices. Non-structural control measures use practices that focus on facility operations and procedures. So examples of non-structural measures include employee trainings and, the posting of signs that raise staff awareness to best management practices in place to control stormwater pollutants. The control measures implemented at each site should be based on the sources and pollutants identified during your assessment in Step 1. So structural control measures include a variety of structure types. One type, minimizing exposure of manufacturing, processing, and material storage areas to rain, snow, snowmelt by either locating industrial materials and activities inside or protecting them with storm-resistant coverings. This includes during loading and unloading, storage, disposal, cleaning, maintenance, and fueling operations. Another type of structural control manages the flow of stormwater in a way to reduce the pollutants that are discharged from your site. These can include the installation of structures that divert, reuse, or contain stormwater. Depending on a specific site, examples include vegetation swales, berms, retention basins, inlet controls, infiltration devices, and so forth. And similar to the management of stormwater are erosion and sediment controls. In general, erosion control measures focus on preventing soil or sediment from becoming mobilized. These are the most common as control measures in construction site SWPPPs, but they can also apply to multi-sector sources too. Erosion control measures that can prevent the movement of soil should be considered first. This includes grading, seeding, mulching, and sodding. Sediment control measures that trap eroded sediment should be the second preference and include installing structures such as silt fences and sediment ponds. And finally, if it applies to your activities, structural control measures including covers and enclosures should be implemented for de-icing salt piles. So non-structural controls include a wide range of non-built test practices. A strong maintenance program repairs industrial equipment, both stationary and mobile at a source. Maintaining equipment in good operating condition prevents or minimizes leaks and other releases of pollutants. Good housekeeping practices maintain a clean and orderly facility to prevent potential pollution sources from coming into contact with the stormwater. Good housekeeping measures include sweeping or vacuuming at regular intervals, storing materials in appropriate containers, keeping dumpster lids closed, and dumpster areas free of debris. Preparing for spill response and creating procedures to quickly address leaks is an important non-structural control measure that reduces the chance of stormwater contamination. And employee training is an effective non-structural measure that is both required and can help reduce potential pollutant discharges. So let's see here. Let's take a closer look at training, since it's one of only a handful of training requirements from EPA. So for the MSGP, stormwater training is required for all of your employees who work in areas where industrial activities or material handling activities are exposed to stormwater. Training is also required for those who are responsible for implementing activities to meet your permit conditions. Examples would include your employees who are inspectors, maintenance personnel, and members of your pollution prevention team. Your training sessions are expected to cover the elements listed on the left if it is related to the scope of their job duties. This training is recommended at least on an annual basis. And for the construction general permit, EPA calls for each operator or operators to assemble a stormwater team responsible for carrying out permit activities. So that would be workers responsible for stormwater controls, storing and applying chemicals, conducting inspections, and taking corrective actions. You know, whoever they are, these stormwater team members must be identified in your SWP, and your training will cover the elements listed on the right if related to the scope of their job duties. And it should be noted here that for the construction general permit, it goes into greater detail about training for those conducting inspections. And for projects that receive coverage on or after, February 17th, 2023, your inspectors will need to complete a course and pass an exam to hold a valid construction inspection certification or license. And just an FYI, the EPA provides that training free of cost, and it's currently available from the EPA's website at this point. And last, just as in step one, once you've selected control measures, be sure to update your SWP. All right. And
all right.
Robin?
Onwards to step 3. So that brings us to our last step in developing and updating a stormwater pollution prevention plan, developing procedures for all the tasks that are required by the stormwater permit. Now, these tasks can include inspections, monitoring activities, and the types of maintenance that will be performed on your structural control measures. So let's take a closer look at each of these. Both general permits have requirements for a number of inspections. The inspection frequency typically ranges from once a month to once a quarter. No matter what the frequency is, EPA does recommend that you develop a routine inspection schedule customized for your facility and specific site conditions. In developing your inspection schedule, consider using spot inspections as a more frequent means to keep an eye on the higher risk areas and activities. So examples include construction site entrances and trash dumpster areas. Now consider using informal inspections that go beyond the permit-required formal inspections. You know, many permits require inspections of your best management practices after rain events, but consider adding inspections before or during those predicted rain events. Also, make sure to clearly and adequately document procedures around your quarterly visual assessments of stormwater discharges. EPA's 2021 multi-sector general permit includes specific requirements for when and how to conduct those visual assessments on collected samples. And after collecting the sample, be sure to inspect it in a well-lit area, or if necessary, you'll want to illuminate that sample with a strong flashlight. Last, keep in mind that all SWP inspections are only as good as the inspector. Therefore, it is important to select qualified personnel to conduct your inspections. Be sure to identify who that inspector will be in your SWP. Personnel selected should be knowledgeable in the principles and practices of stormwater control measures and identifying conditions that could impact stormwater quality. Turning to monitoring, your stormwater general permit may include requirements to conduct stormwater discharge monitoring. Now, the type of monitoring required will be based on the type of industry or construction activities at your site. Not all sources will be required to collect stormwater samples. However, if you're required, the procedures used to carry out monitoring must be in your SWP. Monitoring can include indicator monitoring, benchmark monitoring, effluent limitation guideline monitoring, or impaired water monitoring. So you're going to want to keep in mind stormwater discharge samples should be taken at the facility or site's stormwater discharge points, not at locations within the facility. The last thing to establish and include in your SWP are procedures for maintaining your site's stormwater control measures in effective operating condition and to ensure industrial equipment and systems are maintained. So conduct maintenance of control measures regularly, as well as whenever an inspection identifies a potential issue. When you're establishing your preventative maintenance schedule, consider the design or the manufacturer's recommended maintenance procedures. Remove sediment from structural controls as needed and put new measures in place to avoid sediment buildup moving forward. Ensure that construction support activities are cleaned and maintained, and replace any damaged control measures such as your silt fences. By establishing and documenting in your SWP these maintenance activities, you will significantly decrease the risk of unintentional discharges. Okay, so we have covered quite a bit on the elements that go into how to develop a SWP, but just having a SWP in place isn't enough. To really be in compliance with stormwater regulations and permits, writing a stormwater pollution prevention plan has to be combined with action. Full compliance requires following permit limits and conditions, actually implementing the procedures, installing and maintaining the listed control measures, and making modifications as necessary to improve your performance. We have found that one of the best ways to really help make all of this is by learning from our peers. So to put it another way, we can learn lessons from their mistakes. And as we go through the remaining slides and look at the most common issues EPA has identified during stormwater inspections at industrial and construction operations, we want you to ask yourself how your stormwater pollution prevention plan would measure up. How well have you implemented the procedures described in your SWP? And are there improvements you can make to avoid similar findings during a regulatory inspection and to better protect the environment affected by your site's runoff? Mishka will get us started.
All right, thank you so much, Robin. So for the multi-sector general permit, EPA inspectors find the same common problems during inspections at industrial facilities. So let's take a closer look. Number one, no SWP was developed. EPA found that some facilities do not realize that they need to develop a SWP, or they may just copy a generic SWP. And as we discussed earlier, a SWP is site-specific. It's a site-specific plan, and it should address the specifics at each facility. You know, identifying the unique activities, the potential pollutants and controls, as well as the layout and physical characteristics of each site are what makes a SWP effective. Number two, the control measures described in a SWP were not being used. So it's not acceptable for a SWP to identify stormwater control measures that are not actually being used at the site. If your SWP has identified control measures not being used at your site, you need to edit your SWP accordingly to accurately reflect the measures that you are in fact using. Number three, there was no SWP available on site for review during inspection. Each source is responsible for maintaining a copy on site at all times. If your SWP is being updated off-site, which is quite common, keep a marked up copy on site or an electronic copy until the revised SWP arrives. Number four, the SWP was not signed. We didn't cover this piece earlier, but each SWP must be signed by the responsible facility representative, and often EPA is finding that this signature is missing. The intent of this signature is to show that the facility representative has reviewed and authorized the current version of the SWP. Number 5, the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Team list is not up to date. Again, we didn't really touch on this in too much detail, but each SWP must include a list of the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Team, and that list must be kept up to date. And you can imagine, when we touched on this portion of it a little bit when Robin answered a question earlier on, you can imagine that this is particularly a challenge at facilities with high turnover. One way to make this easier is to identify team members by title rather than by name, and that will help to eliminate the need for constantly updating, when people switch jobs or are no longer with your company. All right, number 6, the EPA found the on-site staff was often familiar with the SWP. A common permit requirement is that at least one employee per shift is familiar with the stormwater program and has access to the relevant files. Too often, EPA found this was not the case. Number 7, improper collection of visual assessment samples. And this goes back to step 3 in our process of developing a compliance SWP. If visual assessment samples are required, be sure to include those in your sampling procedures and implement a reminder mechanism to ensure that they're actually conducted. Number 8, dumpsters are often found uncovered. So we talked a bit about non-structural stormwater control measures. Covering dumpsters is a common non-structural stormwater control measure, and it can be an effective one for reducing contaminants being picked up by stormwater, but only if the dumpsters are kept closed and the areas around them are kept clean and free of debris. Again, the key here is not just identifying this as a control measure, but training employees and conducting spot checks to ensure that it actually happens. Number 9 is poor training for employees and contract staff. Again, this can be an effective non-structural control measure, but it needs to be more than just checking a training box. It should ensure that the people trained fully understand their obligations in protecting stormwater. And last, number 10, EPA has too often found inspection or monitoring records are not kept with the SWP. And records of routine site inspections, visual assessments, or monitoring results should be available with the SWP for review. Even if you're diligent in getting the inspections and the monitoring completed, keeping the records available with the SWP is the only way to be in full compliance. All right, over to you, Robin.
All right, so thank you, Mishka. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about construction mistakes. So this list addresses common mistakes, again, found with construction site SWPs in on-site compliance or to construction site stormwater compliance more broadly. Now, these items are more often related to stormwater control measures and should be something you look for as you're conducting site inspections. So again, we're going to talk about each one. Number 1, not using phased grading or providing cover, either temporary or permanent. So in general, construction sites should phase their grading activities so that only a portion of the site is exposed at any one time. Also, disturbed areas that are not being actively worked should have temporary cover. And then areas that are at final grade should receive permanent cover as soon as possible. Number 2, no sediment controls on site. Now, sediment controls such as silt fences, sediment barriers, sediment traps, and basins must be in place before soil disturbance activities begin. Often these are identified in the site SWP, but they're not installed before the work begins. Number 3, no sediment control for temporary stockpiles. Now remember, temporary stockpiles must be seeded, covered, or surrounded by a silt fence. Number 4, missing or lack of stormwater inlet protection. So all storm drains that could receive a discharge from the construction site must be protected before construction begins, and these protections must be maintained until the site is finally stabilized. Number 5, a lack of control measures to minimize vehicle tracking sediment onto roadways. And control measures such as stone pads, concrete, or steel wash racks or equivalent systems prevent vehicles from tracking sediment onto roads. Number 6, improper waste collection and management. So similar to the open dumpster issue that we mentioned for industrial facilities, construction sites also struggle with waste-related control measures. All waste types, hazardous or not, must be properly stored, covered, and contained. Number 7, dewatering discharges from construction sites must be treated in some way. Now this applies to discharges from building footings or other sources. This can be as simple as allowing turbid water time to settle in a holding basin. Number 8 is poorly managed washouts. Including washouts for materials such as concrete, paint, and stucco, when you're using washouts as a control measure, make sure they are clearly marked, sized adequately, and frequently maintained. Number 9 would be inadequate maintenance on structural control measures. So as we discussed in step 3 of our process, control measures must be inspected and maintained to a set schedule that you have documented in your SWP. This allows you to find those that have been damaged, need repaired, or require replacement. And then finally, number 10 would be inadequate documentation or training. And we really can't say this enough, how important it is to maintain an accurate SWP and related trainings. Far too often, EPA is finding this to be lacking at construction sites. All right, if you're all still awake, today we introduced the Stormwater Program along with the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan elements. We went over 3 steps to compliance SWPs, and we went over mistakes that EPA inspectors find relating to Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plans. And with that, we have come to the end of our prepared slides. Before we move on to your questions, and thank you to those that have sent us in questions, we would like to once again offer all of our attendees today complimentary access to all of the compliance tools and resources in the J.J. Keller Safety Management Suite. Safety Management Suite delivers round-the-clock access to all of our most popular safety management tools, including customizable training, audit and inspection checklists, written safety plan templates, and much more. Use the poll on your screen to select your interests. And as a thank you, we'll email you our Spill Control Sequence white paper. With that, let's move on to questions that have come in. Mishka, maybe you could take one for us, or Jess, do you want to filter those out for us?
Sure. And I want to thank both of you for a fantastic presentation. It was very enjoyable, even on my end, to listen to the advice that you have, because I know that what you have shared with us can be used in various industries. So let's get started. Mishka, I'm going to start with you. This question is about the understanding. People know you have to have your SWPPP needs to be made public. So what is the best way for a company to do this?
Okay, perfect. That's a really good question. So for the multi-sector generic permit, you are correct. Your plan must be made publicly available, obviously with the exception of any confidential business or restricted information. And you can do this in a few ways. One way is to attach the SWP to your NOI, and that's your Notice of Intent. Another way is to provide a URL of your SWP in your NOI, and you can also enter specific SWP information right into your NOI. Now for the construction general permit, It's a little bit different, and it's the EPA, it's the EPA or your state-assigned agency that would actually provide access to portions of your plan upon request. So, if someone from a member of the public or something requests that, that comes directly from the agency. But of course, any confidential business information would be withheld from the public. I hope that helps to clarify that question.
No, I was going to say that, and that makes complete sense. And I apologize for spelling out the acronym when I know it's SWIP. So my apologies. I think
that's fine.
Even though it is 2 o'clock in the afternoon where I am, I think I could use some more coffee. Robin, I'm going to go over to you next. I work in construction, and I don't have an office. So, and I know that this is going to be the case for so many different industries that are moving more into out of the office ever since the pandemic. So, will an electronic SWIP be okay, or do I need to keep paper copies if I'm moving around to different sites?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So under the construction general permit, an electronic SWIP is okay. Even your inspection reports and other compliance documents, those can be kept electronically. The one thing I would caution you here is that the plan and these documents must be kept in a format that can be read in the same way that you can read a paper record. So they have to be legally dependable. So what does that mean? They need to be the same value as their paper equivalent. And they need to be accessible to an inspector that the same way a paper copy would be. So I should say, with the construction general permit, if an on-site location is unavailable to keep your SWIP, then when there is no personnel present, you need a notice of the plan's location posted near the main entrance of your construction site. Now, for those of you with a multi-sector general permit that may have the same question, you need a complete and current SWIP that's accessible at your facility. It can be in any format, but again, it must be immediately available to facility employees, EPA, any local agency at the time of a site inspection. So all that being said, the short answer is yes, an electronic SWIP and records would be compliant, but just use caution with it.
Now, I have a follow-up question to that. It has to be, the form has to be accessible, but is there a specific format that is preferred if somebody is looking for a copy of the electronic SWIP?
Yeah, I was going to say, Robin, yeah, I was going to say that no, I don't think that there is a preferred. I don't think that there is a preferred, and certainly the regulations don't specify anything, specifically in terms of format, just that it has to be readily accessible. And like Robin said, it has to be equivalent to a paper format. So, something that's easy to access. You don't want your employees to have to, if they need to reference the SWIP for anything, that they have to log in, or that it's in a locked cabinet, or, things like that, that it's away from reach. It needs to just be readily accessible.
Which makes complete sense. You shouldn't have to be running around trying to find access to this document at the last minute.
And even if it, of course, and even if it is electronic, just something, all employees, and it's typically, the employees, if you think of like a warehouse or, in an industrial setting, and even the employees on a construction site, those that need access to it may not necessarily always have access to that electronic format. But if that is the route that you choose to go, you have to make sure that all your guys and girls have access to that format.
Which makes complete sense. And as much as I would love to get through the many other questions that were submitted today, I think we're going to have to pretty much close up today's webinar. This hour went by very quickly, but I do want to remind attendees, if you are watching it on live with us now or even watching on demand, please feel free to submit questions. You can submit questions using the survey or during the using the Q&A widget. This applies to on demand as well, because any questions submitted post-event will be sent to to both Robin and Mishka. So, and I do want to thank you guys, thank you ladies, for a wonderful presentation this afternoon. It's always a pleasure to work with the team at JJ Keller. And thank you to our attendees who are joining us live today. At this point, I am going to close up the webinar for this afternoon or this morning or this evening, wherever you're joining us from. And we hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of the day. And Mishka and Robin, thank you again.
Oh, and thank you all for everyone that attended, and thank you for hosting us, Jess. Thank you so much.
Of course. Looking forward to you guys again soon.